as a minimum commitment.
What are you, the police, John?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that Mary might have missed more than one. I think everybody else, no one's missed more than one.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have a count. We can look. So welcome everyone. This is a meeting of the short-term rental working group. This is meeting 10. And I want to apologize in advance. I am doing this meeting from a public location. I tried to find as quiet a spot as possible, but I apologize for any background noise. And unfortunately, you all will hear it more than I will because I am blocking background noise in my headphones while I talk to you, or else I'll get too distracted. So let me know if it gets too loud. Our meeting objectives for today, we have quite a bit of time up front to hear from our data analysis team from Process First, who are going to give us some updates, and then they have some questions for us as well. And then we're going to talk about the policy goals and levers survey that you all filled out. And John and Jim have an update from their conversation with Woodstock, Vermont. And then we will wrap up, talk about our working group session, our subgroup session on legal issues later this week. There was also a request to talk about communications, especially given the ramp up toward town meeting. I know it's a topic of concern to people. And of course, we will take public comment before we aim to by 8 p.m.
Stacy, what do you mean
Sorry?
by communications? What do you mean by communications?
People wanted to talk about, yeah, I'm trying to answer. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, people were asking about the communications of this group to the public and making sure that the public is aware of what we are discussing, the progress we are making, and do we know that there's, people know they have the opportunity to share comments, et cetera, and really understand where we are and where we're coming from.
Are we going to talk about the specific situation that arose this week with one of the members of the group?
Yeah, so we can talk about that, and let's maybe raise that now. Peter, do you want to say something about it?
Well, I did not receive the letter, but I'm under the impression, as I saw it online today, that Mary Lepre has signed a letter endorsing Article 60, which is, I think, in violation of the commitment that we all, except for Julia, made to the group at the beginning. And I think based on that, she should be removed and somebody should replace her from the Board of Health.
Was she the only one, or did any of the alternates sign it?
I didn't see anybody on there that I knew other than her that was on the committee.
Okay.
Julia, did you want to say something?
I thought that what John was gonna, or what Peter was gonna mention is that there are some, I think there are some, personal attacks happening amongst the work group members right now. I thought you were referring to something that happened on social media yesterday. I'm
old and I probably didn't see it, so.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Maybe you can fill us in on that one, Julia.
No, what I was going to say is Meredith not being here, maybe if it's about Meredith, she should be here. I think I heard that she wasn't feeling well, which is why she wasn't here today. And so maybe she should be here to talk about why she would have signed that letter.
Yeah, listen, I don't know, and I know that she usually, a lot of times comes in late because she has to take care of the kids and stuff. So maybe she'll be joining the meeting and she can fill us in.
Well, I
Yeah.
just don't think, Julia, I don't think this can just be left over for another 2 weeks. Because Peter, you're right. I didn't get it either, but someone sent it to me and it does not seem right.
So Meredith did let me know she was not feeling well and that she might not make it. She did ask to chat, but we weren't able to connect prior to the meeting. I can make a commitment to try to connect with her in the next couple of days and better understand where she's coming from. I think also, as we made clear, the ground rules could not be enforced. They were aspirational and they were a commitment you all made to each other. Whether there is an enforcement mechanism, I guess I would say, Peter, that we as a group have not been empowered to change the membership of the group. So I think that any request to change the membership of the group needs to go to the select board.
I agree 100%.
So, yeah, okay,
Well,
Julia?
maybe it's not an issue. Maybe only John and I think it's an issue. So maybe can we figure it out now and then you can take it to the select board or not take it to the select board?
Sure. So I guess, yeah, I could bring a sort of a comment from the group or a request from the group to the select board. But let me get a sense from the group of how other people feel about it. Is there anyone else who wants to speak to this issue? Jim?
Yeah, I don't feel the need to ask the select board to remove Meredith. I would like to be able to ask Meredith with all friendliness and kindness
She's on now.
why she felt it was appropriate to sign this. I think Meredith is an important member of the group. It doesn't seem like our agreement to sign this, but I'm sure she has her reasons. And I certainly don't, I don't think we need to remove a member from the group. I think we just need to work together to understand what's going on. Thank you.
Oh, Meredith was able to join. Hi, Mary. Sorry, I know you aren't feeling well. The issue was raised about your signing a letter, and the group was under the impression that you had committed to the ground rules to not support any citizen petitions, but to really focus your energy in this process. And so I think people had some questions for you on that.
So I'm here as a non-voting member, so I really just did not feel that me signing that was that horrible of a thing, because I have not voted to agree to anything because I have a no vote, and that is brought up every time my name is brought up. So I'm a non-voting member, so it was not something to hurt anyone's feelings. And honestly, what me signing that letter compared to some of the other things I've seen written on Facebook that some of the other members have written, I feel like is very mild. I think that there have been a lot of heated arguments about this and a lot of heated discussions. So I just think that we all have our own personal feelings and are trying to work together, but I'm not a voting member. I'm part of the Board of Health. I'm here as a representative from the Board of Health.
David?
I do think, one second, I do think we all went around the room and said we endorsed the non-communication statute, and Mary, I specifically remember agreeing to it. So, 6 of one, half dozen of another.
David?
Couple things. Mary, you're part of the debate, so you have the ability to swing people's opinions. So And then with the social media posts everyone's referring to, I did it. And I'm gonna own up to it. I did not do anything but share an email that was written. I added no text to it. I might have made a snarky remark about it, but I added no text to the emails that were written, and I'm not ashamed of it for a minute.
Julia.
I mean, I don't know how the rest of the group feels about bringing requests to remove members to the select board. But I do think that, at the onset, like the representative of Act Now were pretty clear that we weren't going to, we were going to have open communication with the media, and that we wouldn't necessarily agree to not supporting another article. I hope you do have a sense that we've been, we've been cordial and civil and tried to be respectful and so maintain like the overall sense of the ground rules otherwise. But I think that, a lot of the behavior that's been happening, I appreciate, Dave, that you own up to your post, and that's, I think that's okay. But it doesn't mean that was in line with the ground rules of this work group. And it was so I think if you try to go after Meredith, I kind of agree with Jim. Like, I agree with Jim that hopefully we can rise above what's happening outside and try to come up with solutions that we can bring to the voters.
Kathy.
Yes, so just, in general, I'm not speaking against any specific person or anything, but I was just curious. I didn't get that letter. It was sent to me by some folks who had gotten it, because I think it probably only went to voting people. Was the statement that STRs are illegal, and sending that out to people. And I was just curious as to how can people who are on this work group working on short-term rentals be taking the stance that they're all illegal. That's never been brought up and discussed as a group, and I was shocked to see that in the letter.
Yeah, thanks. And, I see we have a number of people who still want to speak. I do want to just say, I recognize now is a very tense time for this issue. It's, tempers are heated, and opinions are very divergent in some cases. The ground rules do ask everyone to please commit and live the principles of decency, civility, and tolerance, and respect for each other, but also to negotiate in good faith and to share information that is accurate. So, I think, as we said, these are not ground rules that we can enforce in any legal way. I think anyone is, of course, can go to the select board with your request. It doesn't sound like the group as a whole is coalesced around any particular action that you would want the select board to take. And I worry about us taking too much time away from the hard work we have to do. We have a number of attendees and members of the public who are here watching us and who really want to see this group succeed. So I'm going to take these additional comments, but then I'm hoping that we can move on with our work together. David?
Yeah, I am with Jim. I just don't think it would be productive to go to the board, to the select board, and I mean, we've got our work cut out for us. It is what it is. And Mary said her piece, and I just think that we as a group need to power on and power through this. And just one last defense of my post is that I let someone else's words see the light of day. I did not put the words in his mouth. And that's the last I'll say of that. Thank you.
Okay, David. John?
Yeah, so I agree we should not take this to the select board. But guys, we've got 3.5 weeks to go. Could we at least come together and say, can we all behave a little differently over the next 3.5 weeks? Because my fear is this is going to escalate to even a worse pitch than it's at. So, you know, to anybody who has done it or is thinking of doing it, can't we just, you know, come together as a group for 3.5 weeks and let other people do the speaking, you know, outside of the short-term, you know, work group, and, you know, let us get on with our work. And it's a distraction when any of these things happen. It's a big distraction, and it's going to be worse if it's repeated over the next 3.5 weeks.
Yeah, thanks, John. And yeah, thanks all for you know, being willing to hang in there on this tough issue. Karen, you want to add something?
I was just going to say, I think this speaks to what we were going to talk about at the end with what we can communicate out about where the group is and what we're saying now, where we are and what we're looking at. I think that'll be important at the end of the meeting to talk about that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, you know, to Robin's comment in the chat as well, this group needs to put out to people where you really are and where you stand, knowing, of course, it's a work in progress. There should nonetheless be some conclusions and some sort of where we are that the group can communicate. So let's come back to that at the end of the meeting. Okay, with that, I would like to hand this over to Matt at Process First.
Thank you, Stacy. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. I have one of my colleagues, Alex, is on. I think you'll have to unmute him if the questions are really specific in the data when I send them to him. He is on mute, I believe, but I'll take the lead for now and we can go there if we need to. You know, my team, you know, the short version is, and we'll give you the long version in a minute, but we're starting to feel pretty good about all the information we have, our ability to bring it together, our ability to start providing you guys useful analysis from the information. You know, the way that I was talking about this with my colleagues this morning and then with Stacy and Semanish was, as we work through this, I'll be careful to not provide guesses about stuff I don't have clarity on, but as I do start to have elements that become clear, I will start providing you guys information, especially with the goal of your in-person work, to make sure it's not a day of, hey, here's our analysis, but to make sure you have time to make sense of everything. You know, we're starting, I think in the data specific group, I describe the work with engineering sometimes as uphill engineering work and downhill engineering work. And the uphill process is largely about discovery and understanding things that aren't defined until you really understand them. And I think we're coming through kind of over the top of the hill right now, and we're starting to do the work to integrate all the data sets and build the tools and algorithms we need to identify you know, which things match and where, and validate our deduplication. So we're into a phase where we're working towards your answers. And I feel really good about the fact that we're going to be able to provide you some great insight that's going to help you inform this. And I think, and I mean that regardless of the timing of getting NARAB data or not, I think we can provide you clarity around issues that have been ambiguous and unknown, and we'll be able to provide a lot of clarity to those even before we're able to get all of the information. Any high-level questions there before I dive in? Okay. So with that, you know, we're about to make a selection in the morning, back tonight on an aggregator platform to implement into the model. We've written all the prep work that'll integrate that data set. And our last bit of decision making is around the value of one set, basically the business of web scraping, which and data integration, which is what these companies are in, is imperfect. It's not like each service is a one-to-one match. It's like, hey, we started scraping this one on this date and this one on this date. This one goes back this far. We were only scraping it in this region. And the work we've done researching these platforms on the sales calls has given us the best information that we can get before paying for a thing to make sure we're making the right choice. We're basically down to 2 platforms. One is AirDNA and the other one is Transparent. And the difference being one has more total listings on its platform and the other one has more performance data. In other words, how useful have the listings been? Based on other data sets that we have and what we've been able to pull together, I think we have our completed list of listings. And so we'll actually use the platform to more speak to how what we've called the intensity of usage of those, and more so than the creation of the listings. Does that make sense as I've explained it? Or I suppose if there's no questions, I'll keep moving. So we feel really good about where we've gotten to, even though it's not there's no perfect answer with a decision like that. And so the other thing we've been able to do is we've started to unpack some of the questions around, say, ownership, which is one of the questions that I think was raised that I wanted to address. And we'll get to that, I think, in the course of the questions that I've sent to you. So really what I want to focus on now is the questions that we've adjusted, and those questions we've adjusted based on what can be better answered and more accurately answered. And so some of them are just tweaks we've made to your language to make sure that, adding, say, measures of statistics as opposed to just how many in certain scenarios, and others are like adjusted based on a practicality of, say, what is how much is someone on the island if we can basically answer they are residents or here greater than 6 months, but we can't say is someone a short-term resident or a visitor or a 5-month resident. That's not a level of clarity that we have on humans. But anyways, I want to screen share and I want to dive into these questions if that is good for everybody here. Great. Okay. Stacy, do you see what I see? And is it the refined question list with yellow? Perfect. So I'm going to start just right from the top. And I will note that I've already made, these things are going to slowly evolve, and they're going to evolve as we get exact, more control over the data. And I've already made a few small changes based on ways we've been talking internally and ways that I've realized it'll be more important to speak to you guys without being in our team conversations, of course. So the first question set, we started with how many STRs are operated, of what size, measured by bedroom and occupancy. And you had 3 questions under that. How many units are used as STRs on Nantucket? How many bedrooms does each unit have? And what is the total occupancy limit for each? And our suggestion is that we ask how many active listings are posted on online STR booking platforms based on available data up until March 2023. April 2023. And I made a slight adjustment to the language there because I think there is still, until we get the final data set, we want to make sure that you're not thinking that we're going to tell you about listings that are posted in March. We're using the data we have up until March of 2023 to speak to the size of the, to the answer the rest of the question, essentially, as opposed to what I said the first time, which I believe was how many STRs are listed on March 2023. So that clarification is just in line with the spirit of the question and just a nuance that I wanted to adjust. The next one is, what is the median range and interquartile range of bedrooms for these STRs? And again, that's just for what you're hoping to learn, I think, better information than, what is the average? And the same for the occupancy. And so our notes there are just that we think that is a better standardized way of summarizing characteristics of that information. And I adjusted that language change in yellow. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, Matt, sorry, if I can jump in there for a second, because I do see that you have, your question asks about online STR booking platforms.
Yeah.
And the group's question was about how many STRs. So do you want to speak a little bit to that?
So there's one thing, and I think this is something where we're trying to get you an answer to a question and knowing that there'll be secondary and follow-up questions. Active is a really key word here. And active is a term that we can validate through performance data, which comes from platforms and will eventually come from NARAB data, which we don't have yet. So I think this first iteration of the question is based on, in your first version, you said how many are operated. And I think what we could provide, if this is more what you want to go to, is totals, and then a subset of them is active. Because I think people do want to know how many there are, but I think what's more important than how many, say, are registered or could be rentals is how many are rentals and are actively rentals. And my guess is I'm going to end up answering both of those to make sure that you guys have more clear and broader information. Does that feel like a good adjustment?
I think that's helpful.
Okay. And I will say that we wrote these to make sure that we were keeping the size of the question set to be in line and not ever expanding. So some of these are questions that we've narrowed to make them more accurate or specific, knowing that we would, with your feedback, end up adding. So ensure to add.
And sorry, just one other question for you on this, Matt, is can you explain what an interquartile range is?
I have teammates that can validate my statistical speaking here, but basically it's the middle. And it's interquartile goes from the 25th percent to the 75th percent. But with median and mean and interquartile range, it gives you a better clarity of where center is. There's a lot of standard ways to speak to center or average, and average isn't really a term average isn't that specific when it comes to statistics. So mean, median, interquartile are all other measures of center that we'll use to give you more clarity on the information.
John?
John, you're on mute.
Matt, I know we're on mute, but we're on questions, but I just want to, a couple of times you've mentioned NARAB, and sometime in the discussion tonight, I hope we're going to have an open and direct conversation around, are we likely to get NARAB data or not? And because if it's the or not, the sooner we get our head around that, the better. So if it's not now, we can talk about it later, but if I can put it on you to make sure that we do talk about that.
Sure. Yeah, let me make a note of that. And I'd rather come back to that out of the question set. I think it's a different direction and energy. There's another hand up.
Dave?
Yeah, sorry. I heard from Penny today. She said 95% of NARAB offices that were asked to put in have logged into the portal and given the information to the UMass group. So it appears we're well on our way with them.
Awesome. Thanks for that. I had a follow-up scheduled with them next end of the week, early next week. So it's a good update, for slightly more updated than my last check-in. Thank you. Any other questions on this question set or these adjustments here?
Yeah, can I just say one other thing, Matt, which is, I think when we asked about how many bedrooms each unit has and the occupancy, I think there were other breakdowns that people were interested in about bedrooms and occupancy. That is, for example, like our units that are whole house or year round, have more bedrooms, or, like people wanted, I sort of opened this to the group, but if there were sort of specific questions people had about the relationship between the number of bedrooms or occupancy and other pieces of data, and without going down a rabbit hole, just, to be clear on why you would want that, but I wanted to just see if the group had thoughts about that.
Yeah.
David?
Yeah, I don't know if it just gets too complex with a rabbit hole, right? I think it would be interesting to see, if in fact some of these STRs are housing more people than the health department would allow in a house, but I'm not sure how we understand that or how Matt pulls that information out and if it's useful, I don't know. But I think generally for us, I'm not sure it's super important. I mean, I think that the amount of a house rents and maybe the bedrooms it's a tough one. So I don't know. I think I would look for the rest of the group to weigh in.
All right. Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll just say that, as we get to where they're distributed, I could imagine, people may want to know, what are the likely impacts on the availability of short-term rentals if certain restrictions are made, right? So that's why the number of bedrooms or occupancy might matter.
Yeah.
But
So, Stacy, can I ask if getting statistical information about bedrooms and occupancy is not enough, can you just give me some more details around what type of other additional specifics you'd be looking for?
Let's say people want to do something different in like certain neighborhoods that are closer into town and have different restrictions on neighborhoods that are further away from town where the houses are bigger. I mean, you could probably presume that the neighborhoods with bigger houses have bigger short-term rentals with more units, but that was just sort of the thought that entered my head.
Yeah.
Peter.
Yeah, am I off? Yeah,
You're good.
yeah, okay. One of the things you gotta be aware of is the way people advertise and stated bedrooms don't really mean anything. I mean, I see houses, when I look through the ads, advertise 4 bedrooms, sleep 16. Now, you tell me how that works because they have 2 people in the living room and they've got 4 bunk beds in one room, so I don't know whether you can really get the real information. I don't know whether it's even available. You can get number of bedrooms, but not number of beds by any means.
And I think there can be a difference between a listed number of bedrooms and a zoned or a permitted or deeded number of bedrooms. I've heard someone talk about beds in a room as opposed to bedrooms. So
Julia.
Yeah, and I think that like the annual license will do a good job in capturing that. And there's a rule, I think, is it two per bedroom plus 2 for the whole house. That's technically the occupancy that folks will be allowed to have. But if it's easy to get occupancy and it's something that, informs, pieces of information, I think that's interesting about intensity of use, I guess.
that is covered on what we've posted here, or are you just kind of affirming, or is that something you feel we're missing in this stated question?
I'm just affirming.
Okay, got it. And Stacy, the way that I see what you've the added additions you made, like by zoning, house size being slightly different, but by zoning, I think is more of a filter of the same question. You essentially would answer that question, then you would enter it and aggregate and group the answers by zone. So could be done, and I would put that into the things of let's follow up and answer those additional questions once we know they're useful before we try and answer everything up front. So I think learning more might inform further iterations of questions that you all have.
Sounds fair.
I would love to answer all questions, but importantly, you got to start with the ones you know you need. Great, I'm going to move on to the next one. Oh, Kathy, please.
Okay, just quickly, as far as zoning goes, the thing to be careful about in zoning is that it doesn't really tell you much. Just because someone is in a 3-acre zone does not mean that these are 3-acre properties. There's a lot of grandfather stuff, tiny stuff, so you can't go by the zoning it's very hard to do that. Just throwing that out there.
Lot size, we should have access to information that would speak to lot size and things like that, and then you get into multiple buildings on a lot, and that's a good reason from my perspective why this would be a round 2 question, or something that we dig into once we have clarity onto why we want to know it. And something I'll put out there is I try to make sure that, we can create a lot of information and all information is useful, but it's important that we think about things that are, most information is interesting, not all information is useful. And it's important that we try to focus on the information that's useful. All right. Important statement to get backwards. Great. I'm going to move on to the next one then if we all are good. Great. The next question set is around distribution largely. And so place each unit on a map to show where they're located and how they are clustered, show ownership and other information where possible. And my overall arching comment is first, that's going to be done within the bounds of privacy. And that's going to be a privacy decision that we are both contractually limited to, as well as, assumed levels of privacy. I don't think a pin on the map with all this information for each home in an exact location is likely to be what you get. But being mindful that there are going to be ways we can figure out how to cluster and speak to what the breakdowns are in different zones, and figuring out those zones is a challenge that we haven't yet defined. That's once we have the information, we can work into that level of detail. And with that preface, our suggested questions are: place each unit on a map, show where they are located and how they are clustered. Again, that might be for us, and you'll get some version of that. On this map, show the category of ownership, such as personality, trust, etc. On this map, show if the STRs are owner occupied. Show the number of bedrooms and the occupancy limit.
So that map, that actually gets to the point we were making above, right? Geographic, at least by geographic area.
So where, on what lot a rental exists or a listing exists, and where it is are kind of the two defining features that, when paired with the other question, would allow us to go into detail and answer variations of that. But again, there's so many variations down that rabbit hole that we're starting with the key ones, and then we can get into details as they become relevant.
Yeah, Peter.
Just a question, can you put all that on one map?
What do you mean by that?
Well, you have 2,500 houses that are rentals. Let's just say we have 2,000 of them in information. Can you fit that on a map so you can segregate it so it's readable?
So I'm gonna kind of go into a technical answer to that, and then maybe we can back up to the answer you're looking for, which is a map is just a display of information in a list according to coordinates. And so I can carry all that information and I can tell an application to present it on a map. The amount of data or detail that would be on that map would be a choice we would make based on what we think is kind of like can be shared in a way that's meaningful. We wouldn't put 2,500 pins because that would be identifying each home and its characteristics. We're more likely to summarize groupings of information according to what we're yet to define to give you all the information in that map-based format.
But it does say place each unit on a map.
A map that's really, to me, what that really means is have the information about exactly where it is so that I know where it exists on a map, and I don't yet know what level I can show you to know what that will mean as a deliverable, as a shared deliverable.
Listen, if you can do it, more power to you.
Yeah, I think that's one of those important levels of granularity that is both potentially valuable, but also potentially a distraction, because any individual home might matter to an individual or a neighborhood, but doesn't so much matter at the statistics and policy level. And so I'll make a note here to be more specific within line. Be more specific. There we go. In line with sharing abilities and contractual obligations. I swear I type faster when no one's watching. Yeah, does that answer your question? I'm sorry, I think that's not it's sort of a non-answer, but I'll get you better information as we move forward.
Fine.
Yeah, thank you. Kathy.
Okay, just quickly on the definite there, right, with number 3 is STR is owner occupied, and just a little nuance I'm not sure if you're aware of, but for zoning purposes, Nantucket actually currently defines owner occupied as 3 months out of the year. The federal definition is 6 months out of the year. So, the data set you're using, how is it determining owner occupied is the question. So you want to be able to figure that out, just sharing that information.
So At the moment, I think our answer to that is the current information that we already have aggregated, and we're working to figure out if we have more detail to get to a more accurate level of understanding. And does this group have an intended use or definition of that term in terms of which version they're interested in?
I just wanted you to make me aware that there are two definitions, and whoever you're getting your data from, that will determine that definition, which may or may not align with Nantucket zoning. That's all.
And
Yeah,
can I ask a question about that? Is that, and then is the definition of year-round resident aligned with either of those, or it's something else entirely?
Year-round resident is just there are also different ways to look at it from terms of taxation, whether
Yeah.
you're considered year-round or not year-round. That defines, you pay a lot more taxes. There's no tax abatement for part-time residents. I don't know where that, I think it's 6 months. That's the definition for that, but there's a different definition in zoning. So there's lots of definitions there. Just wanted you to know that they were out there, and we need to be clear on which one we're using when we look at the data.
So when we give you final presentations, anytime we make a statement followed by numbers, we'll define any term both into what it means to us, as well as some level of detail on and how is that figured. So I appreciate all clarifications like that, and we'll be sure to get those to you in the version that is accompanied by numbers.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Jim.
Yeah, Matt, thanks. On number 2, the category of ownership, I'm concerned, first of all, that what we have there might not match what we've been thinking of. And second of all, that it might end up creating a red herring or red herrings. Because the thing is, as we've learned, we know that it's difficult to get to the bottom of an LLC or trust, although we've been told you can do that.
Yep.
But we also know that a number of LLCs refer to natural persons, and which is the sort of thing I think we'd be in favor of ownership for STRs, and trusts do as well. And I shared the brief little tidbit that when my wife and I redid our will last year, the lawyer had us put our house into a trust, a Massachusetts trust, or, revocable trust, which we had never thought of. It doesn't mean we don't own it. We own it, but, we had to do it for legal purposes. That's so different from a corporation that is at the heart of an LLC. Or maybe even the trust, I don't know, but I know that corporations can reside within LLCs. And so I understand these categories exist, but because we see a major difference between an LLC that refers to corporation and a natural person, but we don't see much difference, at least I don't, between an LLC that refers to a natural person and a natural person who's the owner. It's not that those categories don't exist, but I'm wondering if they would create red herrings that would make people think, oh, this is this and that's that, but they might not be at all because of what
So the nuance that's going to be unpacked in the evaluation of that question doesn't fit nicely on one line. I've been digging pretty deep into that. And I, for now, the question is simple. And I suppose what I'll make note of is, this works. This question is good in spirit, if indeed we're able to unpack that. And what I'm trying to figure out is either there's that base level and we report it in a way that is truthful and not yet overly interpreted to perhaps be inaccurate. But my hope is that we can get to a level of detail that gets you past that. In other words, and we're doing some work by hand to learn and explore. We're doing some by scripting, and I'm trying to figure out how deep can I get in terms of understanding of corporate ownership in an appropriate time frame. And there's, I think it's a thing that we want to be able to share and unpack with you all. And I think if you're comfortable with the idea that we're going pretty deep on that now, but I don't want to try to unpack it before I've summarized it succinctly, I might ask to leave it there unless you'd like me to explain more about what I do know so far.
Yeah, that's great. You're working on it. I guess what I would say is the sets and subsets should then be different. That one set should be, let's see, what do you call it there? Okay, natural person, and LLC and trusts that refer to natural person. That should be one set.
Yeah.
Another set should be LLCs that refer to corporations, or maybe LLCs and trusts that refer to corporations, because I think that's the crucial data we're trying to look at. And I don't know if it can be structured that way, but that's how I would see the sets and subsets to make it to more accurately reflect what I believe we've been talking about. Someone else can tell me if they don't agree with that, of course.
And that's my intention, is to get to that level. I think the first level and what you see here, the way that the questions were written initially, which are, the information, and those are essentially the three information, aside from a non-LLC, but a incorporated or a C Corp or S Corp or something. Those tend to be the three categories that exist on paper. And then the second level interpretation, which is what I've been able to do so far to a really high degree of, I believe, success and accuracy, is getting to the kind of like, is it a natural person? Is it a, and LLCs and trusts tend to be either representing natural persons, or an LLC is a part of another corporate level. And trusts get a little trickier, and I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to spend time diving into that with trust attorneys, but there aren't as many trusts in the LLC, in the STRs anecdotally as there are LLCs. And the question I'm personally working on right now is, how am I going to break down LLCs and to what depth? And so I think when we speak about this, before we get to answering that question, you will all be asked to sort of review what we say is, here's what we can give you, here's a level of detail we can give you on this breakdown. And is it, we can answer this. So we hope this is a good answer for you, because this is a level that can be answered, but to make sure that it matches the, I don't know, spirit or intention of the categorization.
Yeah. Yeah. So at the risk of being repetitive, I'll just say I would hope that in the big set of natural persons only, we'd have natural people and also LLCs that refer to natural people. That would be one category.
And trusts as well, right?
And trusts, absolutely. Like I just mentioned with me and my wife, absolutely. Yeah. And not to put too fine a point on it, but I think it's one of those crucial distinctions that we've been grappling with. And if you can help us with that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. I will definitely be able to help you to some degree, and my hope is that that degree is significant. And I think the question is, at some place we draw the line, and at some point, corporations represent people, and that they're owned by people, and are they owned by a couple people or many people? And at some level we'll say, basically, if the level of inquiry is X layers deep or X amount murky, we're going to define it as a corporation. And I think that line should at least get us past those two things, which represent most, which are, I buy a house and I put it in an LLC, and it's Matt's House LLC. I think that's going to represent a majority of them.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you, Stacy. And Matt, I'm going to jump in here and just say, this is one of those questions that's going to become a lot clearer when we've analyzed a lot of the data. Because I think the spirit of this question is also about the the intensity of usage as well, which is going to determine whether something's kind of treated as a business, whether or not it exists in an LLC. So I think this is one that we're gonna get to that first level, and we're gonna keep going deeper.
Yeah.
And this is one of those ones we're just gonna sit talking about at the end of our analysis as we interpret the results to say, all right, did we categorize this well? I kind of expect this to change. Jim, I appreciate your the distinctions you were making as well. But I'll also add that even if it's an LLC referring to a person, one person can have a dozen or dozens of them too, which is just, I don't know. There's a couple different layers. So I think this one is going to be, it's probably one of the ones you're most interested in too. So I'm also very sensitive to it.
And so if there's that first level, like what is it on paper, and the second level, and what does that represent? I think the third layer, as Alex was saying, is the purpose, and that purpose is something that isn't as perfectly defined. And I think it's something that, again, we're going to say, based on the information we have, this is a distinction that we can create with confidence and at scale across the data set. And you all will be asked to either see it and interpret it based on the line we draw, or to help us define and draw that line. But an easy example would be, yes, if someone owned 10 and they were all being used full time, the intent of that would be different than if it were one person with an LLC. But the actual categorization of the structure is a really different question than the intent. I hope that was as fun as you hoped
Yeah.
it was, Jim.
Yeah, and yeah, Matt, I was just gonna say, like, at some point it may be a question of how certain we are about who the owner, like what this ownership means, right? Like, so you might have some like these, I'm pretty darn sure these are either people or, LLCs or trusts that are actually people. And these I'm pretty darn sure are companies. And these I'm really not quite sure. They could be companies, they could be people. Here's why they might lean this way or that.
Yeah,
Right.
totally. And in this level of work, or at this sort of type of work, there's always a last few that you can't unpack, and you either define them as unknowns or try to get a sense of what they're about, even if you can't define them. And, unfortunately, this is it's just a prioritization decision at some point. I'm going to keep moving on if there aren't more questions here, though. Cool. All right. Where are they? So next, with regards to intensity, your questions were the number of days and number of leases per year, the number of days and number of leases during peak season, the average and range and length of stay, especially during peak season. And we've adjusted that to say for all Nantucket STRs defined as those gathered from online listings. And I know that might be adjusted as we include the NARAB information, but basically the data that we have that can answer this question. What are the median ranges and interquartile ranges of the number of days available, the days rented, the days blocked by owner? And those tend to be the three interpretations of performance, as well as revenue per room, and the number of rental contracts per year. The next question is, what is the average length of stay? And again, I think we let average sneak in here, but I think that is probably mean, and I will just make a note for us to break that out, or Alex meant it as all the measures of mean.
We're still exploring some of the transaction level data, if we're going to get that. So this might turn into that same median and interquartile range, if that might be useful.
Thank you.
Because I do think that this was done under the assumption that we are only going to be getting basically a monthly summary, and so we won't really be able to meaningfully break that out. But if we're getting down to transaction level, like raw data, then we can really really break that out. So I'll say that's more to come on that.
Julia, go ahead,
Sure.
Stacey.
I
Julia?
guess just, so this is one, it came up, I think it came up in some of the policy labor discussions, the idea of perhaps a minimum stay or something like that during certain periods of the year or whatnot. And so what you're saying is, and I think the number that was being thrown around was a week. And I think a week seems like I don't know, sort of people want to ensure, folks can come for just a week, but maybe less than a week. I think that's where the question was around. So do you think you'll have the ability to, let's say, tell us, what's a week or under, or what's a week or over, or, maybe is there a way, or is it going to be lumped into 2 weeks and under, which then doesn't really tell us anything because we're looking at a different,
So with the transaction level data, which is, essentially transaction level data says from April 11th to April 14th. And then we add in the step of saying that is 4 days or 3 nights, 4 days during this period. Assuming we move to that level, we'll be able to do more or less whatever we want, knowing that all questions in more detail take more time. So I think if there's a specific question that you guys want us to answer, that might be like a follow-up or a variant of this that you want, is not tell us about the length of stay, but how many break within this parameter and this parameter, because that will be something we use to inform policy.
Well, that's a good question. So in general, it seems like there are, I'm not sure how you guys are going to break it out, right? But there are whole houses, which is, the large majority of what the short-term rentals are. And then there are apartments, and then there's sort of rooms and kind of true home sharing. And if you were going to break down, you know, I'm not sure what kind of buckets you can, that would be helpful in my mind, because you're not necessarily, you know, your average length of stay in a home sharing situation might be a lot shorter than, let's say, in a, you know, whole house. And maybe we're not concerned about the home sharing at all. And so we're not looking for it to skew the numbers, if that makes
So it's almost
any
like
sense.
rather than length of stay, we're more looking for like category, you know, bin modeling, like categorization within ranges, or I wouldn't want to extend it to like archetypes, but yeah, better. I'm just going to say more deep detail distribution of length of stay. And I think I will just make sure we follow up with you all on this as you get further and we get further to figure out if we can match the granularity that we can provide with the format that you want it in.
I think seasonality is a big one, obviously. So, you know, if it's by month or something like you said, that might not be bad. You know, that might be pretty good.
So also length of stay by time of year. Yep.
Peter?
Yeah, Matt, I think the problem with that is length of stay changes yearly. I think everybody, not everybody, but the majority of people who put their homes out to rent, and I have never rented my house, so I don't know that, even though I've been accused of renting my house, wants to get the longest stay possible. I mean, why wouldn't you want a month if you could get it? But if you can't get a month and you can't get 2 weeks and you can't get a week, maybe you'll take a weekend. So I think it varies. And I think you're going to find it when you go look at it by 4 years. It's going to vary each year per house. I mean, it really depends on how lucky they are in terms of renting, I believe. Maybe some people on here who do rent can fill us in on that, because I don't know.
Yeah. The one thing I'd suggest is perhaps there could be a really specific analysis to do something like, and I'm proposing this with a caveat that this is not something I expect we'll do, but like, you know, how long is a stay this length of time when it is bookended by a longer, more open period of time before and or after. But then you start having to make a lot of leaps and assumptions about the person, the property and all that. And so I think the level of question that you're getting at is really interesting. And I think like at the intellectual level, it's probably the right pursuit. I just don't think it can meaningfully be answered or reasonably be answered within a whole data set.
No, I agree. I don't think it's possible.
But I do think it'd be great to know that one, and maybe in the future there's some improvement to a policy that could be shaped around something like that. I don't know where you're going with that one yet, but worth keeping in mind. I think it's a good question.
Kathy?
Yeah, I think just one of the things that would be interesting to know is there's, you know, if you think about one of the policy levers we were looking at wasn't just, you know, minimum 1 week, but when minimum of 1 stay per week, something like that. So I don't know if you can pick that out, because that's different. You know, there are people like me, for example, who would rent for 3 days, but only once a week. So, you know, rather than the full week, if that's what I could get, kind of thing. So the question is whether that's different, whether that matters, whether there's a lot of people who do that or not, because, you know, how you phrase that limitation depends on, you know, 1 per week or 1 minimum of a week, you know,
So-
kind of thing.
I'm going to put this a little bit in the category of Peter's question, where I think that might be a really valuable thing to dive deep on and discover, but only once you know exactly what question you want and how you want it to shape policy. I don't know at the summarization of information we can
We
answer.
have 2 different policy levers. One is a minimum of a week, and one is 1 rental per week of any length.
And so what sorry, so maybe I'm just asked differently. What is the question that you would want us to answer?
To be able to count them those 2 different ways.
Right, to be able to, so I think the question would be, what would be the implication of a ban on, you know,
I use the term implication.
yeah, like that's part of what we want to know is the implication, meaning how many existing rentals would no longer be allowed to be renting the way they are, right? If we were to put in this policy.
I think the
Go ahead, Alex.
I think the number of rental contracts per year maybe speaks to that a little bit, because it sounds like you're proposing a maximum, a time-bounded maximum.
Well, that's a
Um,
third, that's a whole nother one, which I was gonna ask, which is I think people really want to know about the number of rentals per year and by month as well.
And
'Cause
those
that's-
are,
And
and those
really
are-
a distribution, I think, Alex, so there's a sense of how many, like what percentage of STRs are being rented, 40 times a year, right? Versus those that are being rented twice or something like that.
And
yeah,
so Stacy, let me suggest that how many rentals would be invalid based on a minimum of 1 week or X number per weeks? And is there a number?
So they haven't set the number, so that's why I think they'd want to see the distribution.
And is a week a calendar week, or is a week any 7-day period?
I think the group has been looking at 7-day period.
If I could, Stacy, and most in the summer, I think I would say at least 80% have the same changeover day. It seems to have a rhythm, more of a rhythm in the summer than it would off season.
Yeah, I think it ends up being that way in practicality, so that kind of like rentals in Boston, they turn over on September 1st, so everyone knows the deal and the switches are smooth. Though that isn't a smooth day in Boston, but.
I was going to refute that wholesale, Matt. The switches are not smooth.
Kathy?
Yeah, I'm done. Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, Jim?
Yeah, thanks. So I think what we want to look at is number of rentals in a given week that are less than a week. For instance, if someone rents for 2 days, takes 1 day off, rents for another 2 days, takes a day off. I don't think there's a lot of those in the summer, but we do want, as Stacy said, we do want to find out if that's common, because we want to know if it will be affecting those people in ways that may not be good, those renters. My experience as a renter, to answer Peter's question, is that generally speaking, most people want at least a week in the summer, but in the shoulder season with weddings and everything, it's usually just 2 or 3 days that people want. The family comes up for a wedding. I personally think that the policy lever of only 1 rental per week, which I guess would be 7 days, it seems to me that's the one we've been coalescing around, not trying to say that every rental has to be at least a week, but just saying only 1 per week to try to limit the churn of all that. So I think finding out how many rentals are per week, I don't know how to say this right, but short rental number, more than 1 short rental per week. Like if someone rents it 2 days, 2 days, 2 days, that's what we need to find out, because we want to know if we're going to be affecting a lot of owners.
Yeah, if you don't mind, give me a minute just with Alex. So Alex, I think the kind of the query is like, how many 7-day periods contain more than 1 lease, more than 1 completed lease?
Good.
And what is the distribution of those by listing and total, or something to that effect? Does that feel right?
Yeah, I was thinking average number per 7 days. And so you're going to end up with like a 1 point something all the way up to potentially like a 2.5, maybe. But
7 in theory, but yeah.
well, that would be aggressive.
Yeah.
I guess that's a hotel, huh? Yeah, does that, sorry, thank you for that, letting us have that sidebar, but I think I know what to do with that one. And if Alex feels good, then I think, Jim, we can figure out the right answerable question that meets that intent.
Thank you, Matt. That's great.
Yeah, you're welcome. John?
Yeah, Matt, I think this is self-evident, but before we leave this, I just want to make sure that you, understand at least one of the whys that this is so important. And for me, one of the big whys about understanding this is to understand the impact of short duration STRs on a neighborhood. Jim used the word churn, and that's a good one. But if you're if you're in a mainly residential area, having people shuttling through every 3 days, that does destroy the nature of the residential nature of the neighborhood. So I just, you probably got it anyway, but please keep that in mind. This is about the people that live there and the impact this has on them.
Yeah, and John, that's actually really helpful because, I think there's often a gap between asking the right question without the information and asking it with the information. And sometimes the question can end up not answering, the answer cannot answer the question, even if it's in theory the right one. And so we can be mindful of, questions that speak to the spirit of a neighborhood with regards to churn or something to that effect.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And thank you. That is helpful clarification. Julia.
And sorry, Matt, if I'm repeating myself, but I just want to make sure that the conversation between, so the idea that churn is important, but I also think, and I hope maybe I'm the only one, but that understanding what type of unit is being offered is important in the context of this length of stay or the churn, because ultimately I think you're going to see, for example, units that are, whether it's home sharing or a small, a master suite in somebody's home, they're not going to be rented for a week. Or they may be rented for much shorter stays just because of the nature. They don't have a kitchen. They don't, it's a different type of scenario. So, and I think it would be helpful to understand, to pull those out if it's possible.
Yeah. So, essentially with regard, within the context of whole homes that are standalone buildings or something to that effect, what percent have, what is the average lease contracts per 7-day period, something like that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Alex, did I state that adequately or do you want me to find that in more detail in writing?
Sorry, Matt, I was down looking to see if we had any other questions that address something similar. So I missed your summary.
I think I'm good.
Cool. I think you did a great job summarizing.
Thank you, Alex. Kathy.
One more thing, it might be useful to know if there's what the frequency of rentals are that are 2 weeks or more, just having somewhere, a cutoff like that.
I actually, Robin put that in the chat and I already copied and
You got
pasted
it. Okay. Yeah. Because I think, there's been a lot of discussion about, back in the day, people used to come for the month, our families would come for the month and, that wouldn't be an issue. It's not a short-term rental if you do that, but people, is that a trend going one way or the other? And I think a lot of the data that we'll be looking at will go through the pandemic, which of course is not a normal situation, but it would be useful to see the breakouts by that. That's all. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good on this question. Knowing that I'm sure will be more next time, but and hopefully this is valuable to you guys. This nuance is really valuable to us. And I think I feel good about the questions that Alex has helped to shape, but also I think the details you've added are great too. So next one is about who owns STRs. And the original questions were how many are owned and occupied by year-round residents, how many owned but not occupied by year-round residents, and where are they located? How many are owned by seasonal residents and where are they located? Differentiate between LLCs, trust, business, corporate ownership. How many are owned by non-natural persons and where are they located? Insight about different characteristics, price, location, usage, intensity for different categories. And how many STRs are owned by people who operate more than one STR and how many do they operate? How many would be impacted by passing the 3% community impact fee? Breakdown by ownership and or residency. And our alternatives or our adjustments are: 1, how many STRs are owner occupied as determined by provided data? What is this as a percentage of total STRs? And I think Alex, I probably will just add, we want to define whether they're like active or inactive, but like some better.
Yeah, I think just from getting a little bit more familiar, and especially the conversation we had today, which is maybe lost among everyone else here, but basically, if you look right now, there's only a few hundred, and if you look, in 3 months' time, there's going to be nearly double that. So I think if we use a standard, if we just define probably July of 2022 or something as our kind of our standard when we're talking about these, just pick a date that likely has all or almost all of the houses in play. That's probably what we're talking about there.
Okay.
And just a reminder here to when you're saying owner occupied, that we have the multiple different definitions to keep in mind.
So one of our terms that we know needs to be fully defined and that will impact the exact definition of a question, and acknowledging just here for you all that we know that term is in here as is, but needs to be better defined. I saw a hand that disappeared. Julia?
I guess just to maybe weigh in a little bit on that one. I think Kathy, sort of said like 6 months and 3 months are kind of might be the two cutoffs, and that would seem to make sense. I would assume that residential exemption might be the way that you find, 6+ months. But
Yeah,
I think it's probably important to look at both.
The things as it relates to owner occupied listings, I think is going to largely be determined by what we can answer as opposed to what's maybe the most perfect answer. And I think we'll get back to with when we can exactly combine an establishment of owner occupancy with a listing. So I think if that's all right, I think that's something we'll want to come back to you guys with more detail on rather than try to fully unpack here before we determine that more finally. Thank you. Dave? Oh, you're on mute, David.
I just wanted to caution using the exemption. I just think that there's not everyone takes it, not everyone knows about it, and there's possibly people that are on it that shouldn't be. So I think it's a good place to look, but I think you also need to reconcile that in another method. And like said earlier, I think affordable housing has a whole different definition of year-round or owner occupied. So I think you're gonna have to just find a number and make sure that it's clear when referred to what it is, and I think it's easy to work with. Thanks.
Yeah.
We stopped you on question 10 here, I think. So if you want to.
Yeah, thank you. I think aside from the defining owner occupied, that question is fairly straightforward. 11 is how many are owned by natural persons, primarily owned. Alex, maybe we don't want to unpack it. Is primarily an important term here, or is that a?
That was a term taken from the town assessor database. They have two ownership slots. I think I refer to that in notes on changes.
Got it.
Owner of record. Yeah.
Got it. How many are primarily owned by trusts, LLCs, and business entities? And I think, again, once we unpack those to the level that we can define, I think we'll rewrite the nuance to those to be most descriptive and answerable, completely answerable. Julie, up and down with hand. You good? Cool. Jim?
Yeah, question. I don't know if this matters to anyone else. I was curious about if in this list, will it identify, I'm thinking of this, I'm thinking of the year-round resident who maybe owns his or her own home and then owns a smaller home on the island and rents that as an STR.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious myself what percentage of STRs that is. In other words, they don't occupy that smaller, let's say it's smaller building, but they live here more or less year-round and they rent it out. It seemed like that was in our original questions that were old. I may have that wrong. Let's see.
We have ones who are owned by people who operate more than one.
Yeah.
And you do, yeah.
The reason I'm asking, I know a number of people who own a home and then they own a smaller place that they use as an STR. And I don't know if it matters to other people on the committee, but that to me, that's an interesting and an important statistic to get. Because
can you explain to me why that's important? Just what would you do action-wise with that information so I can understand it better?
Well, some suggested policy levers could mean that you have to live in that home for a certain amount of time in order to rent it as an STR, for instance.
So having the second, living in one would potentially grant you access to a second.
Well, in some policy levers, it wouldn't. It depends on who's writing it. And so it seems, in the people I talk to, it seems like that's a concern. And I don't know how big a number that is, but it seems fairly large among the people I know.
So can I suggest the question maybe would be for owner occupied STRs, how many, or what is the breakdown of owner occupied STRs that own more than one STR?
But see, in this case, they would only own one STR because they would live in their own home. So that's where that doesn't fit exactly.
Well, if they're renting it, it's just an owner occupied STR, or is it not an STR if it's lived in?
Yeah, so when we had our meeting in, I can't remember when it was, January, we had a virtual meeting with a number of people who were interested. And in my small group of about 7 people, 3 of them own their own home, but they have a small, whether you call it an ADU or whatever, or a smaller place, either on their property or next door, that they rented as an STR, and they were worried they were going to lose the right to rent that STR. So I think
Are you referring to within one lot as well as an additional?
Either.
Or
It could be, see, that's where it gets complicated, Matt. And I know this is, this may sound like counting angels on the head of a pin, but the people in this group, they were all, number 3 of the 7 were saying, yes, I have this little, I think 1 or 2 of them, it was on their property, and 1 or 2 of them, it wasn't. And they said, but we can't live in it. But we rent it out, it pays for our mortgage, and it's helped pay for our kids in college. And if we lose that, we're going to leave the island. So the question is, if we can protect them, it might be a very good thing to do. But can we identify them is my question. And I don't see that in these questions, but I don't have your acumen for understanding them, so I may be missing it.
well, I'm gonna take that compliment, but pass it to Alex and see if he can answer that with his level of acumen.
I think we were thinking about this question, and it may be possible to, I'm trying to think how to frame this too, Jim. I think the difficulty I remember having is when you're matching up a name, you're going to end up with a lot of false positives, or you have the risk of a lot of false positives. So if you have John Smith owning a home and then owning an STR, unless you're able to trace it back to that exact John Smith, you may end up accidentally attributing a bunch of properties to the wrong person, even though it's owned by John Smith from Florida.
Yeah.
And maybe this is answerable if we pull in all information, all lot listing ownership data. I guess that's really what we might be looking at anyways.
I think it's a lot easier if we're talking about ADUs or partitions within a single property, as you mentioned, but it's going to be a lot harder if you own something like a small cottage on the other side of the island.
I get it.
Yeah.
Alex,
I think we might have removed it. We can
this
follow
one.
up with that and just see if there's any way. I think we might have removed it. I might have also have notes on that.
Because what we might find is that it's significant enough that it's something you want to protect as an exemption to an otherwise more broad policy statement. Is that sort of the idea or the intent there?
That's my intent, but I'm not sure everyone agrees, but that's my intent. Stacy, does that make sense what I'm saying?
It does. It makes sense as a concept. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to take up any more of your time, but if you can work on it, I think that would be really good.
Yeah, we'll follow up with that one. Peter.
I think what Jim was saying, and I think you said it, Matt, identifying them is not nearly as important as protecting them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be, they don't have to be identified, but when we come up with whatever we come up with, I think Jim is concerned about protecting these people rather than identifying them. Doesn't really matter how many of them there are.
I try really hard to stay out of the policy side of this, but perhaps with things that are like really nuanced to pick out in a data set, are there ways that you can add a provision that says, you know, like if one person falls within the cracks of an otherwise intended to be protected group of people in this policy, there's room for them to petition to say like, hey, this one little cottage with no bathroom or kitchen on our property that people rent is important for us to keep this so we can live here. You know, is there an ability to add in that type of thing here? And we can try and tell you if it's relevant, but the specifically strange nuanced ones are the ones that may not get caught because it's not worth the effort to dig in to every category that you would have to create and define. And that's something I don't want to tell you, here's everything, it's perfect, when there's a lot of, you know, n=1 categorizations that we might not make for you because it's has to be deprioritized.
No bathroom or no kitchen's illegal anyway, so.
Well, that example. Oh, fair enough. John. Oh, you're on mute, John.
Okay, Matt, sorry. 2 quick points. So Jim and I this week last week talked to a person who was very involved in STRs in Woodstock.
Yeah.
And they do have, as part of their regulations, they do have the ability to have waivers. They do. And it didn't sound like they used it a lot, but it is there for sure.
Yeah.
The second thing, I know this is going to get me in trouble with my friend Jim, but you know, if there is a small cottage on the same lot, that's pretty easy to deal with because it's one lot. So if you got 2 homes, but one of it is being rented, I don't see how that would even become an issue at all if it's on the same lot. The moment it's on a second lot, though, if you say, well, if it's a small one, it's okay, but if it's a big one, it's not. And if it's this distance away, you know, I just don't know. That just sounds like a track that would get to be very difficult to start saying, yeah, well, you know, you don't rent your own home, but you've got one that really becomes a commercial STR because that's what it is.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think we have what we have for this. We know it's a bit of a tricky issue. I don't want us to go too deep into those weeds. And just for time, hoping we can keep moving forward. Kathy?
Well, just quickly, there are a lot of people who have bought or had started out with smaller homes and then bought a bigger one, and they rent that one for income, and so they have separate homes that they rent, you know, to pay their kids' college education or other things, or maybe that was their family home and they had to leave the island because there was a housing crisis and they can't live on the island and they want to keep that home, and so it's not owner occupied. So there's a big, you can't tell that in your data. I know you can't. Who has this 3rd generation house, but there's just so many people like that, and that's one of the things that we can't count. I can't imagine how we can count that. So.
Thank you. Yeah, we've seen companies that have gotten to really creepy levels of acquiring data, and it's not a business I'm trying to be in. So I think the intent is something that you guys have to work out on that policy side there. And yeah, that language, I'm hoping I can be helpful in the word choices you use that might categorize people in their homes one way or another. But yeah, I'll be careful around what I can and can't answer, and college being one of them. But yeah, no, I think that's important. Thank you. I'm going to keep moving through these questions then. Don't need emojis. All right, so distribution of addresses for the controlling entities. I think there was a question about like, and where are they? And that's something where if we're able to scrape that sort of second level information en masse going through 1,500 LLC listings is one thing by hand. If we can get a broader data set with an API from an open corporates or something like that, perhaps we can answer those questions in more detail. Usage characteristics, again, we give the measures of middle for days available, rented and blocked by owner, as well as revenue per available room, and the number of rental contracts per year for the different categories. And again, categories may change as we further change those categories. And then how many, no hands, how many STRs are primarily owned by a person or entity that is the primary owner on more than one property that is used as an STR on Nantucket? And of this subgroup, how many would be affected by a policy that adds a tax on anyone operating 2 or more STRs, excluding their primary residence? And what is the distribution of ownership type for those? Again, ownership type being something we may further split and differentiate. Zoom in too. Questions there? Are those pretty true to the original intent?
Yeah, I think that's good because it tells you how many have more than one, how many have more than two. And I think that, based on ownership type, I think that's going to be pretty helpful.
Yeah. And Jim, I put in this note for you, but you beat me to it. So hopefully you're satisfied with that note on changes. It's pretty fascinating. It's super hard to unpack it perfectly, but it is interesting. I learned about new trust entity structures, and Massachusetts has some of its own and whatever. Anyways, old question set. How have STRs changed over time? At least 2019 to 22, but earlier if available. Any changes in use, location, intensity, and ownership over time? Homes that have shifted from year-round to seasonal, do they operate STRs? How many newly constructed units were registered as STRs within 1 year of completion? How many newly purchased units were registered as STRs within 1 year of sale? Location and price points of these shifts. And our suggestions are 18. What are the trends in questions 8 and 9 above? Plot the changes for each usage characteristic in a visualization. And sorry for the scrolling here, but questions 8 and 9 are answer the above. So essentially, usage. It's the intensity question, intensity over time, and intensity by time of the year. So for let's see, sorry about that. So so the trends in those questions essentially, and plot them. And what are the trends? And I think that's something that we're leaving room there for us to name things we see that are particularly trendy, as it were. I don't know that is intended to yet define a specific thing. Question 20, from 2019 through 2022, how many buildings were used as STRs within 1 year of construction date? And I think that change might be just to define it as such a way that the data we have is defined, essentially like when is a thing, what is the construction date? Does anyone know, and I'm not asking because I'm unsure, I'm just not sure if we know this yet, is the date that's going to be listed in assessor data like a completion date or a start date or a building permit date? Alex might already know this, but I figure someone in this group, I just know that on hand.
I don't know the answer to that. It's a good question.
Because,
I think all 3 will be on there.
One more time, Peter?
I think all 3 will be on there.
Got it.
The
So I'm
permit,
just gonna make it
date, start of construction date, and the completion date.
permit start completion. So I'm just going to make a note for us to be mindful of those differentiations, because sure, plenty of buildings that aren't completed within a year of permit or start. Okay. For 19 to 22, how many buildings were used as STRs within 1 year of construction date? What is this as a percentage of total buildings constructed in that year? From 19 to 22, for buildings that were sold, how many were not used as STRs before and were used as such after? And proposed additions, and we're trying to be mindful of not adding more to what's a tight timeline, but we thought these questions might be pertinent. How many were not used as such before and were used as such after? How many were used as STRs before and no longer used as STRs no longer used as such after, how many were not used as such before and not used as such after. And we added that since you received your questions.
And I think I found a typo, but also there, that was definitely my fault. I think I added these consciously because I thought that it would really help us speak to the net change rather than just kind of throwing a number out that may be a little bit misleading. You know, if you see a lot of them converting to STRs, and you ignore that maybe a lot more of them are converting away from STRs, you might end up with the wrong conclusion. So I just wanted to make sure that all the different combinations, or I guess permutations in this case, were accounted for.
Good correction. Questions there? These are a little heavier to turn from words into numbers in your head, so take a minute.
They were hard enough to type.
A lot of short words. Yeah, Julia.
So I'm seeing in your notes here that you're saying that the question on the original proposal that was omitted here was about the shift from year-round to seasonal housing. So this is just not something that you're omitting because you don't have information. Is that what it is?
Alex, I'm going to let you speak to that one.
Yeah, I mean, seasonal was, it's not, I guess if we're defining seasonal in a way that can be meaningfully measured, that would be useful. I don't know if seasonal refers to a week or a month or 3 months. And I don't know of a way that where that information is captured. So aren't we trying to figure out year round to STR? To short-term rental use?
But there's a differentiation in there that isn't defined.
Yeah, and the intensity within, we basically are going to know whether somebody is on a list of resident as it stands right now, and I'm open to. I just don't know if there are any data sets or there's any information around people who are over or under 3 months or over or under 6 months. We're just working off of a list that we got from the town clerk for residents, essentially.
Right. So you're not working on. So this is why residential exemption would be really helpful. This is where it would come in handy, right? Because then you know it's a year-round resident who owns and lives there, and if it's an STR, you're not really concerned. If it sells and it's no longer on the residential exemption list and it falls off, then you can say whether it, and if it was an STR today, operated as an STR, you could say, okay, it used to be year-round and now let's say it's an STR.
I'm having a little bit of difficulty tracking all of what you said, but I think I'm in line with what you're saying. If we knew the, it's funny, I'm going to borrow the same words we're using. Basically, if we knew the usage intensity of a resident before they, basically before they sold or before they converted it, and then we knew the usage intensity after, that would be really helpful. Yes. I don't know, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't been able to find that, but I'm open to there being data sets that we haven't explored. You're saying the residential exemption may have some of that?
Well, residential exemption certainly tells you whether it's an owner occupied. This is the best data set to tell you whether it's owner occupied.
Mm-hmm.
And 6+ months, not 3+.
Yeah.
And so
I think someone who's 6+ isn't seasonal. They're effectively year-round. They're as close as we get to year-round.
correct. But I guess I'm not understanding, you've omitted the shift, like just tracking the shift from year-round to non-year-round.
I'm wondering, Alex, do you want to just regroup and really dive into this one deep and report back? Would that be a better way to do it? Or do you think there's something we can learn here that would help us reshape this? Or is this just something we should put more time into?
We can talk about it. I have a, yeah, we can talk about it, Matt.
Yeah, I
David?
think that's good. So final comments on this or the broader question, David?
Yeah, I'm gonna take my hand down because they're gonna dive farther into it, then I think I'll just wait. I think that I understand the importance of this, but I think it's gonna be a difficult one to ferret out, but we'll revisit it when you guys talk about it.
Yeah, and if David and Julia have input or context to that, you feel you both have strong insight and context to it, perhaps share that with us and we can try to figure out let that shape our understanding.
Yeah, I understand where Julia's going with the exemption, but I don't think I don't think that's going to give us a clear enough picture. And I think that in reality, it'll probably give a lower number than it should be at some sense. But I think it's really difficult to tell how that house was used if it was sold 5 years ago, unless it shows as a rental, how that was used. I mean, we can clearly see if it became a rental, but it's hard to tell. And I think the exemption won't give us a super clear picture of the extent of it, is what I'm saying, I think.
So let's just hold further comments on that for now and circle back. So Peter and Kathy, if your comments are on that, hold them. But if you have other comments, feel free.
Well, I just was gonna say, just over this, you have to wait a year before you can even apply for residential exemption living on the island. So it's gonna be inaccurate to begin with, just because of that. Nonetheless, there's a lot of other factors which I can talk about later on.
Thanks. Kathy?
Okay, so just quickly, the purpose of year-round and owner-occupied and all that, gets back down to, whether we want to discriminate between those two categories of people and then how to define them as well is really tricky. I wasn't feeling that there was an awful lot of consensus in doing that kind of going down that path from the group or from the levers that we looked at so far. So it may or may not be and useful information, and it really depends on knowing when people are in their houses, and I don't think anybody really knows that. So how do you measure it if you can't? I just don't see how you can do it.
And just to say, I mean, I think one of the purposes of this question was to try to understand if there was a trend that, like, the extent to which short-term rental and the appeal of short-term rental, is it eliminating year-round housing, right? Are people selling their year-round houses so that they can become short-term rentals? So I think that was the impetus, not necessarily to have a different policy for different kind of users, but more to understand, right, the relationship between short-term rental and year-round housing availability. I think that's really what the group was trying to get at there. But we recognize that, there are limits in what information there is, and, there may not even be enough to make it's something statistically meaningful. Even
we
if
want to be
do it.
mindful
So,
of
yeah.
in effectively answering a question that we can't give enough information on to be anything but likely misleading. I think that's why in this case Alex wanted to remove that question, but we can look deeper and to figure out if we think there's a meaningful answer we can give.
David, was there something else you wanted to add? No. Okay. All right. Back to you, Matt. Anything? I think we're going to try and, if you can try and move quickly through your.
That's it. Those are my questions. Everything else was.
Did you want to do the data source issue?
No, I want to actually, I think next meeting, whether we have a specific data meeting or at our next meeting, we'll have completed all that work and we can say, like, here's what they are, here's what we did, here are the fields, here's the kind of summary of the shape of the information. But I think these were the really important part, and we've shifted these based on what we believe is finally shaping up. And next time we present, we'll present information to give you all more clarity and confidence in what the information is that's now going to inform those questions. And then the last session, how they were answered, so that you agree with how they were answered and the information and the answers themselves.
Okay, but before we shift to our next topic, Matt, did you want to ask people the source data platform source question or confirm that with them?
Oh, I ran through that at the beginning.
Did I miss that? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
just in that we think we're making a final transition or a final choice, and we shifted the way we were thinking about it. And I think I ran through that in as much detail, and nothing that came up in
Okay.
this discussion. Well, Alex and I will review in follow-up after we jump off what that means. And in short, no, I think we're good on that unless
Okay.
there are questions.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you also, Alex. That was, I think, super helpful. And for time, I want to kind of move us forward, if that's okay with everyone.
Yeah.
So.
And Stacy,
yeah.
we had spoken about how long to go, and I hope we stayed in time, but I was planning to jump into some more work. Is there anything you'd like me to participate in today, or are we into survey work?
I think you're good. I think
Okay.
you're good. I'm not getting my slides show.
Cool. Well, I'm just going to say thank you, everyone. I really appreciate that thoughtful and discussion. I think that was really helpful for us, and I hope that we're able to take all that information and really bring that to life in a helpful way. So thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Okay, let me see if I can do this. Does that work? Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yeah, that looks good, Stacey.
Okay. Okay. So I want to try and do this pretty quickly. You all have seen these slides. I did update, though, slightly because I got 2 responses after I sent this out to you. I think this one didn't really change. I do think it's quite interesting to see where people seem to be on the outcomes that you're hoping for. I think we might have gotten maybe a little more precise than we were at the start of this process when I asked people what the goal was. Even though some of these are, I want to protect what we already have. And so I think it's important to note, right, that many of the outcomes that people hope to see from this policy are not just changes and fixes to problems, but they are also protections and preservations of existing things that you all really like and appreciate about Nantucket. And I think that's really, just to the question of why are we doing this? Part of why you're doing this is those preservations that are threatened perhaps by policies that you all or some of you may find less wise or less valuable. So it really does sort of speak to the balancing act that you all are trying to do with the policy that you are crafting. So knowing that you all have seen that, I'm going to move on. And this one is only slightly updated, added the 2 people. I didn't on here write all of the questions, but I think you all can see it. I think what's really interesting is that 12 out of 12 of you would like legal clarity. 10 out of 12 of you would like to protect the ability of all existing STR users. Let's see if I can jump to, yeah, so legal clarity for SCR operation and ending of lawsuits was unanimously wanted, and protect the ability of all existing SCR operators to continue to rent their properties. There were 10 people who, out of 12, who supported that. We had 8 people wanted to protect the ability of year-round renters. 7 people neither eliminate nor necessarily reduce, but but avoid escalation of pure STR use of homes. And then 6 wanted to reduce, 4 wanted to eliminate. 6 people wanted to reduce noise and nuisance beyond what the regulations already did. A few of you, 4 of you wanted to meaningfully increase, meaningfully increase the number of affordable attainable houses for purchase. Though some of those who voted for that still said they're not sure this policy would make a huge impact on that. Slowing the increase in costs, and then a number of things that were ones. 0 people said they wanted to reduce the total number of tourists in the shoulder season, and only 1 person wanted to reduce the total number of tourists in the high season, right? So it seems there's a vast majority of people who do not want to reduce the number of tourists, who do not necessarily want to reduce the existing number of STRs, who want to protect existing STR users. And I think the questions then become about how to, many people who want to ensure that the problem does not, that there are not too many increased STRs going forward. Kathy.
Just quickly, this is not on the numbers or the results, was just clarifying. So this survey went out to 20 of us. So that would be all of the members voting and non-members and the alternates. And you only got 12 responses back. Is that what you're saying here? Okay, thank you.
Yes. Any other conclusions or thoughts people have about this slide? Julia?
I think the most, there's a couple of surprising things on here, but I appreciate Kathy's point, which is, you know, it's not a clear representation of the whole group. But assuming all the primary members, will assume that only 8 out of 12 think that we should be protecting all year-rounders' ability to STR their own property. That's not necessarily enough to bring something forward that would do that.
Yeah, I mean, it could be all the, you know, all 8 were primary members. I don't know. We could, you know, go back and look at that. And it may be that people, if people said they want to protect the ability of all STR, if 10 people want to protect all STR operators, presumably that includes the year-round operators, and they didn't click year-round because of the divisiveness of that language in their mind. So their goal would still, if your goal is to protect all year-round, all existing SCR operators, that will include year-round operators.
I didn't understand the questions being posed that way, but I could see how someone might be confused and or answer that.
Yeah. Kathy.
Well, I think, Julia, there wasn't a question that asked who supported protecting part-time residents. So there weren't 2 questions. And so if there had been two questions, they might have been answered differently, but there was only one.
Well, there were two questions.
But
There
one was, yeah, but one assumed that you were making an assumption that,
Right.
oh, if you voted this way, you also voted that way. But had there been a question, is it important for you to protect year-round residents? And is it important for you to protect part-time residents? Then people might have answered it differently. So that's just, did a great job in putting the questions out there, but I think that was probably why people answered that way.
Yeah. Peter?
But if can you go back a second to the full sentence? Protect the ability of all year-round residents to STR their primary residences. That specifically says all year round, just year round. The second one
Right.
says everybody. So
Right.
we're not going to have a separate one that says we're going to protect just summer people to have to have an STR. So this
Right.
really covers, those are the only two questions you really need. And I think the majority said to protect all, not just
Right.
year-rounders.
Right.
Okay.
I think what Julia was saying, though, is that we said identify all of those that you support, right? And if you support all, you probably also support year-rounders. But people may not have interpreted it that way, as we just said. So, Kathy, was there something else? Julia?
Well, I guess they are different questions entirely. Right? So you don't, if you answered protecting all existing STRs, that's a different question. Protecting all current operators, right? Current STR operators. That's a different question than saying protecting all year-round residents' ability to STR their primary residence, because there's a big pool of year-round residents who don't STR currently.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. And that's the group that we're sort of, that is the difference in these two questions that we're talking about. That's the group I'm pointing out.
Good point. Good point. And I think that's true. And we have heard people say anybody who said anything in support of caps, for example, is saying that, yeah, maybe we don't want to protect, any year-round resident to STR their residents anytime. So yeah, that could be true. Jim.
Yeah, I totally agree, Stacy. The problem was when I answered that question, I really want to see year-round people be able to keep renting, but STRs as they wish. But if a cap is put in, it would be dishonest to answer yes on that. So that's the problem. I thought, well, wait, some people want to, I don't want a cap, but some people want a cap. So I just thought I didn't think it was a good question. I thought it just couldn't be answered the way the one about it, protect all existing STRs could be. That was clear. This one, I was like, wait a minute. It's sort of like one of those multiple choice questions where it says all, and oh, okay, I can't say yes on this because it's a trick question. So.
Got it. Okay. And so just a couple, again, of explanations. And this was, these I sent to you in advance as well, but there were multiple responses expressing skepticism that STRs regulations would be all that likely to impact the price and availability of homes for year-round rental or ownership. Multiple responses support protecting legal rights of current STR operators, as we saw. A lot said accepting existing STRs but avoid escalating, opposition to discrimination against part-time residents, the preventing properties from being gobbled up for solely investment purposes appeared important to many people. So anyway, you've read all these. The one that was added here was a comment that preventing homes from being used primarily or exclusively as STRs in residential areas could help slow the loss of year-round housing. So we got a lot of skepticism, but also some support for that. Okay, So I've updated this one as well. And this is where people are on the current policy mechanisms that we have talked about so far. So again, if we look at strongly support, neutral, oppose, and strongly oppose, and here I put the actual text in because I was able to fit it. We see the strongest support for whatever mechanisms we use legalize all existing STRs. And that was strongly supported by 7 and supported by 3 and strongly opposed by 2. The next highest level of support was legalizing STRs for all year-round residents on their primary property, which we had, again, strongly supported by 5, supported by 2, neutral by 2, opposed by 1, and strongly opposed by 2. From there, we see STR permits restricted to only natural persons, support or strongly supported by 6 and 3, so 9, neutral for 2, and only 1 person strongly opposed. Here we also see limiting the number of STR permits allowed per person to 1, 2, or 3. We see no strongly opposed, though 2 people oppose it. And 3 people are neutral. We have 5 and 2 in terms of strongly support and support. So I'll stop reading the slide to you and just open it up for thoughts. And Kathy, thanks for the notes. So now, Robin Baton, you are able to raise your hand and speak as well. So any reflections on what you see here? What conclusions do any of you draw from just sort of this is a straw poll. And again, doesn't sort of break down our voting members by our non-voting members. So it's really just a sense of where people are. John.
Yeah, I'm not really going to comment on any of the individual ones, Stacey, but what it does do for me says, we've gone through a process and it's been, a good one. And here we are. And what is very critical is that we now as a group take this, because this is what, for the most part, the questions were clear. And we have to bring this into a balanced article, because it isn't, let's do that, but not that. We got to take this and we've got to, like I said, get it into a balanced article, and no one is going to agree with everything or disagree with anything. And it was interesting talking to the Woodstock people that we talked about how much data did you have? The answer to that was not much. He said, but look, what I learned was that work group had to learn how to compromise and collaborate and bring something together that, gave most people most of what they wanted. And I just think now, Stacey, the time is coming where we got to have those kind of conversations about how to balance this. And, that's your job, Stace, but it is, for me, it's getting to be critical that we somehow have these conversations that will get us to a balance of, how much of this and not quite so much of that, and so forth. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think part of that conversation will be to start to really get into, okay, for those who strongly oppose ideas that others strongly or overwhelmingly support, is there any way we would change this that would shift your opposition while still maintaining the reasons people support it, right? That is to say, if you strongly oppose, restricting to only natural persons, right? Maybe they would say, well, as long as we grandfather, maybe I don't, right? Or, well, if we, allow non-natural, if we allow corporations to have only one permit, maybe we'd allow that, right? So this is where we'll start to get into the negotiation phase of this conversation. I think the other thing to really ask yourselves as you look at these mechanisms is there any data that is likely to change your mind? Now that we have Matt and his team working hard on collecting all this data, how will that data actually impact your views on these or other mechanisms, so that we could try to make those connections as clearly as we can? John, I'm just going to go to Peter because you just spoke, and I'll come back to you.
All I was going to say is, I think at the beginning, with Peter Kahn, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Other Peter, I'll come to you after, Peter.
Thank you. One of the basic tenets that I don't think we've addressed in any of these questions, which to me is fundamental and is critically important for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the legality, is a simple question of, are we going to treat seasonal residents differently than year-round residents? And I'm hoping, I sense here, but I haven't seen it, that the general consensus is we're not going to treat them differently. We're going to treat everybody the same. If we have that, I think we need to get that, what we need, to me at least, we need to have that understanding before we begin to compromise, because without that, there may be no compromise, at least in my mind.
Yeah, and Peter, to be clear, right, it's true that of these mechanisms, this is the only one that even differentiates year-round residents. Nobody in the group has proposed a mechanism to examine that treats seasonal residents different than year-round residents.
Well, the only problem, Stacy, is that we've been using these terms, right? So the implication is maybe. So I'm all for clarity. I like.
Yeah.
Listening to what you say, I agree. We should, let's get it stated then that the consensus of the group that we will not treat them different. That will alleviate, at least in my mind, maybe hopefully others, any concern of the legality issue, and also may allow for some more compromise.
Yeah, and again, I'll say, other than this one, I think so far that's where the group, nobody has proposed any. So I think
then let's not use the distinction between seasonal and year round.
Right. You mean in the data?
Well, yeah. I'm not sure. Yeah. Why is there any difference? Why are we concerned about the data in that regard? If we're not, and I think Kathy raised that point earlier.
Okay, Jim.
I just want to say, Peter, that I agree with you on that. And when I went into this in September, I thought, well, maybe there should be some slight differences between seasonal and year-round, but I soon realized right away, no, there should not be. And I totally agree with you on that. And not just for legal reasons, because I do think it would be impossible to enforce legally, but also for reasons of fairness. When we hear about families that have owned so-called seasonal places, I'll use that term, and they need to rent it to keep it in the family. There are just so many different reasons. They're all different, but I totally agree with you. And I think the sense of the group is that we do not want to have any difference in the ability of seasonal versus year-round people to rent STRs. That's my sense of it.
Peter Schaefer.
All I was going to say is, I think at the beginning, I was never a big fan of data making a big difference. And I really would like, if anybody can tell me what the data is going to do to change their mind. I I think people have their mindset already. And any data we get, I can't see what the data is going to say that would make somebody change their mind. But I'm more than happy to listen to somebody who they think has an idea of what it could say that would change their mind.
Yeah, Robin?
Stacy, would you mind, could you just go back up to the prior slide, the horizontal bar chart? Yeah, that one. So what's interesting about this slide is because you talked about, how do we get to compromise? What do we do to get people to the other side? And when I look at this, it doesn't necessarily look like our job is too difficult. I mean, you have 3 of these levers, which are 8 to 12. You have, what is it, 8 or 9 levers that are 3 or under.
And just to be clear, these are not levers, these are goals.
Or goals. I understand goals, sorry, goals. So,
And so the question would be how we do them.
I understand that. So I just think given, time is of the essence and we have spent huge amount of that rare commodity, shouldn't we really be starting to toss out and say, okay, let's, for the 8 or 9 that are 3 or under, let's just push those to the side. Let's try to focus, are we done on the ones that are 8 to 12? And, what about the in-between? I don't know if we need to pull a lot of teeth to get those who are unwilling to go with the high vote outcomes in that direction.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. And yeah, and just to say, right, part of the trick of this one is translating the goal into a policy lever that is both legal and clear and and enforceable. But nevertheless, your point is well taken. That the group seems to have some goals that they generally share. Okay, so other policy mechanisms to explore. Zoning bylaw to legalize STRs where we want them to be legal. I know that several people have mentioned, we haven't talked about that, but I think we've made very clear here, that's the 12, right? Everybody wants legal clarity. I think everybody who answered the survey, I think it's a given that this group is going to, part of its proposal will be to have a zoning bylaw that legalizes STRs where you want them to be legal. I think that's a given. I don't know that we need to figure out where you want them to be legal and in what ways you want them to be legal, but that part of your task is to make sure that those you do want to be legal are explicitly made legal. And I just want to be clear that I am not saying that they are currently not legal, because I know that that is an issue of contention and that the town council has made clear that the town's perspective is that they are currently legal. But that the group wants clarity on that in a zoning bylaw. And I think that's important to mention. Yes, Julia, you have a comment on that?
Well, I think most people on this work group understand where ACNOW's position would be on this, just generally. So like I'll just state it, just in case somebody's listening and doesn't know. We strongly believe that, and there's town council and the town has acknowledged several times that there is a clear absence of STRs in our zoning that would currently render sort of homeowners unprotected, right? So I completely agree with you, Stacy, that this group should bring a zoning article to bring clarity to this issue and bring protection to homeowners.
Yeah.
What I think I understand there are differing opinions amongst work group members on this issue, but I think this work group, if it does not agree on this question, has a problem to answer, because if half the work group thinks that they're currently legal and half the work group thinks they're not, whatever zoning article you bring is going to have a different outcome, right? Because half the group might say, well, if you're clarifying zoning and if you're changing zoning, you might have to grandfather a bunch of people because it's a currently allowed use. That's not our position, but I just think that it's an answer that needs to be clear to this work group in order to be able to apply, to get its work done is my thought.
Dave, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'm concerned. I don't think anyone in this work group is in a position to say whether it's legal or not. It's clearly an accepted use, and until a judge says it's illegal, it's an accepted use. So I think that for any of us to contemplate, to contemplate whether it's legal or not in our zoning is beyond what I think any of us should be saying or doing.
Yeah. And I don't think, we can ask Judy Barrett the question, Julia, of, how that affects what might be in the zoning bylaw. I think that's a good question to ask her at the subgroup meeting on Thursday. Because, but I think Dave's point is this group is not being asked to weigh in on the legality question. That's not its job.
Sorry, that's not what I meant. What I meant was this group should have clarity in order to be able to make clear decisions on how to go forward. That's what I meant.
Right, but there is, as Dave said, the only clarity is if there's a ruling by a judge. Because you have a legal opinion, that's usually how one gets clarity on a legal issue. And as a work group of the town, the group is going to work under the assumptions of legal opinion from your town council.
Right. So for example, if John Giorgio, town council, I believe, told this work group that, or I'm not sure if it was at this work group or at a select board meeting, but made it clear that this was not going to cause any pre-existing non-conforming uses if the zoning was applied in a certain way or in another. So if that's the case, then that's fine. We need to know that, right? Because that has implications on how the work group brings forward articles. That's what I mean.
Okay, Jim?
Yeah, thanks. I'm not sure I understand all of Julia's concerns, but I think it's going to be all right because I think we all agree that there will be a zoning part of this that will approve STRs. There will be certain regulations. I think it's a totally moot point. I think we're all in favor of zoning, supporting the use of STRs and having regulations around it. Case closed, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I think it's also true that most most of the members of the group do want grandfathering. So I think, Julia, if your question is whether grandfathering is, the option of not grandfathering exists, if that's the question, I think it's a question to ask at the legal meeting on Thursday as well. Robin?
Yeah, I just want to support Dave's point because we, as far as our group goes, which represents Nantucket, we are the short-term working group for Nantucket. We have clarity. The building inspector has made 2 decisions of that STRs were an approved use. The Nantucket Zoning Board of Appeals has made a decision that the STRs in question were an approved use. Now, in light of Julia's comment, there are certain people who are challenging those at courts outside of Nantucket. And I respect that. We have the Land Court of Massachusetts, but at the moment, as far as Nantucket's world goes, there is clarity that there is an approved use and we cannot predict what happens outside of Nantucket. So I really feel that we have to proceed on that basis.
Thanks. Okay, so looking at other policy mechanisms to explore, not all of these are policy mechanisms, but one person did suggest exploring proposals that tie the amount of time an owner uses or occupies a home to the amount of time they can rent. I am conscious of the fact that that proposal was, in light of the existing citizen petition article, and perhaps even just a desire to have this group talk about that that question. So I want to hold that for a second. And then I guess looking at this, I'm curious if people see other things you want to be talking about. So some people talked about having a license to operate an STR as an asset, which would imply that there's a cap, and then a secondary market. There was a comment about tiering fees in order to, and I don't know whether that's something that's legally possible, so that would be something to ask as well. The 3% community impact fee came back up. On-island caretaker. So yeah, curious other people's reactions to this. Peter.
I would comment on two of them. Article 60. I still have to ask the question of if you have a house and you're going to rent it, but you can have to be in 6 months, and then you can 6 months in one day, and then you're allowed to rent it. Where do you live the rest of the time? You can't live on a tent because that's illegal. You can't camp in Nantucket. So I don't quite understand Article 60 to begin with. I don't understand how it's a saving grace that they talk about it as being. So that's it on Article 60. And the second thing is, I've been talking to businesses around town, and I went to one business this week, we only have one of this business, and the owner told me that a 10% decrease in their business, they close. So just something to think about. And we'd have more than a 10% decrease in population or tourism if we went forward with Article 60. In terms of the asset price on houses being tradable, you want to see prices escalate ridiculously, make it a tradable asset. I mean, that's something that's the last thing we want with all the problems we have with the price of houses on this island. I'm done.
So yeah, so Peter,
sorry.
just a couple things. One, yeah, let's focus on this, the idea of this proposal. The second is, I think the asset was not the house, but the that like you get a license to operate an STR. It doesn't go with the house, so you could sell that.
If it's tradable, it's an asset like a piece of stock. It's
Right.
it's a value that's.
But not the house. The thing that's tradable is the license, the STR operation license.
Right. So if I have, okay, so you're saying that if I sold my house, it wouldn't go.
No,
with that.
you forget your house. Right. If you sold your house, it doesn't go with your house. The question is, if you have a license and you want to sell the license and keep your house.
Yeah, but the price of the license.
I think what the person is proposing.
If the price of the license is $100,000, they're going to add that on to the price of their house if they're selling.
Yeah, I don't know if this one, we would want to get a legal opinion on this one as well too.
Okay, I understand. No problem.
Good point. David. No,
I'm gonna hold off on that. I am completely opposed to being able to trade licenses. I think that or sell licenses. I think that is insanity, to be honest. So but other than that, I'm gonna hold off. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else want to speak? Does anyone want to speak strongly on behalf of one of these mechanisms as something you really think we should be exploring? Tom.
Yeah, I think the 3% community impact fee on professionally managed units, and possibly after when we get the data presentation from Process First, maybe we could have a discussion on that. There are other communities in Massachusetts that have done this, such as Provincetown, fairly similar to Nantucket, although not Nantucket is unique, of course. And to me, on this slide, the 3% community impact fee and zoning options are, to me, after listening to our discussions and all the meetings, are the two that stand out to me that I could see us discussing more. And then on the previous slide with the very strongly support, the 2, 3, 4, and 5 columns with the limit, cap, limit, with the other one, the one in the 6th slot here with what is that, 5 opposed, the one to the left of that seems like it's probably a non-starter. So to me, it's the 3% community impact fee, what are the zoning options, and then the limit, cap, limit here, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah.
I'm just giving my own take on after our discussions. Of course.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. John?
Can we go back to the other slide? Yeah, so to answer your question, yeah, I feel strongly that we could all quickly get behind, focus on stopping any further expansion of corporate-owned and investor-only STRs, because when you talk to folk around, the island, there is not many people that you're going to find that don't want to do this. And my sense is of our group, there may be one or two, but most of us, can quickly coalesce around this. And it probably, in terms of impact, honestly, Stacey, I'm not sure it has the biggest impact, but people perceive it as being the biggest issue. So, let's just get behind it, quickly.
Yeah, and the thing I just want to be clear about, John, is so we have sort of two different things we're talking about. One is a goal, right? Those are actually outcomes policy outcomes we're trying to achieve, and the other is the mechanism or the
I'm
lever.
talking about this
right?
as a mechanism. Yeah.
But what's the mechanism? What's the article say? Stopping expansion of corporate-owned, investor-owned STR. What is we're trying to come up with the mechanisms to do that, but what is the law that you want to pass?
Well, that's going to be one of my questions to John Giorgio on Thursday.
May I address that?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
So two things on that. First of all, we do have the language from Palm Springs, which John Giorgio initially said back in October, November would probably be perfectly legal and enforceable. Second of all, we got the Great Barrington decision that Dave sent around to us, where one of their provisions is corporations cannot own and operate an STR. And they talk about natural persons too. It's the same sort of language. It's a little different from Palm Springs. Mar Healy approved it. It is law. Massachusetts approved it as law. In other words, we can do that, whether we use the Palm Springs language or the Great Barrington language. It is legal. It can be done. And I think that will answer. John, does that answer what you're trying to do?
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
And so I guess that's already here, right? We already have that one.
But I think
this slide
really
is the other ones we haven't yet explored. So that's really all I was asking is, John, if there was something we haven't yet talked about that you think would do this, that we should talk about. That's all.
Okay, let me try it one more time. I think it's very self-explanatory. That is the what. Stop it. And let's talk to Giorgio about how to, and he's, we can hypothesize about it, but he's the only guy who can tell us whether we can or we can't, and if so, how. So I don't know what else to say. I think let's make sure it gets airtime on Thursday.
Yeah, okay. David?
Yeah, I think the important discussion from here is how we implement this, because it's going to be done. Well, I don't know how it's going to be done, but I think it's going to be done through both zoning bylaws and regular town general bylaws. I think we need to understand what the implications of each is. So in other words, at some level, we're going to have to codify them as bylaw as an accepted use in wherever we decide. At the same time, we want to be careful not to necessarily grandfather them, because that would impede our ability to regulate them farther down the road. So I think that those are important questions for John and important questions for us as a group, because once something's grandfathered, it's going to be difficult to meaningfully regulate it other than by nuisance bylaws. So I just think that those will be important discussions to have with Georgia, where the regulations go, where the definitions go, where the use goes.
Great. Julia?
Thank you. I agree with John Kitchener on this one. It's no secret that we have been I think a lot of folks are worried about, sort of investor owned, and some are more worried about corporate, and some are, sort of different types of uses. But from our perspective, it's homes not being used primarily as homes. And, the accessory use in zoning is very helpful in that sense, but maybe John Giorgio has better ideas. And it would be really great to hear what he thinks could be mechanisms, because we are not experts on mechanisms. And I think we've come up with some ideas, but he and maybe Judy Barrett.
Yeah. Can I just raise, I think, where I think there might be a point of tension or difference, though, in what you said, Julia, and this piece, which is investor only versus primarily, and you have talked about primarily, and some, right, this article that
in
says,
zoning, I think in zoning, you have primarily and exclusively, and you have accessory. Those are the language, and you have not allowed.
But we're talking about goals. We're talking about goals for a second.
Right. I totally agree. What I'm
is
saying,
is your goal to allow STRs that might not be they might be sometimes, they might be used as STRs more than homes, but they are also used as homes. Would you like to have those be made illegal, that those people cannot rent their homes as
I don't
STRs?
know how. I don't think that that's something. If the whole island turns into that scenario, I think the island is in worse shape than we are in today.
But if my question is, are you in favor of not allowing anyone who has a home, spends some time in that home, to also use it as an STR, perhaps more often than they are in the home?
If there was a mechanism where you could figure out that how to apply that, I think you could find balance ultimately to some degree. I have never seen that mechanism. Maybe John has ideas.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Julia. Robin.
Sorry, Stacy, I don't really understand why we went down this track with what Julia wants. I understand that we are trying to come up with the ideas, policy levers, and goals that the majority of the group wants to achieve, and that getting an absolute consensus is going to be a very difficult thing. And there are parties who are using nuance in definitions of what is a commercial owner, what is an investor, what is a residence. And that's where a lot of the battlefield is going on currently in the media. So I just feel we should back up, not get into a wish list of what any of us individually would like, but really stick with where there is consensus among the group as indicated by your survey?
So again, the survey was a test of where we are so far. The ground rules of the group are that we seek unanimity, and we will fall back on majority, or the majority, 7 out of 10, I think was the right. But I do, part of the way this group has to work is to understand where each person is coming from, so that we can see where are the possibilities of common ground. And what I heard in that conversation was, hey, I want what you want. I want what they want, but I don't know how to get there, and I'm willing to settle for this way. Right. And I think that's really important to know, because if we can now come up with what makes consensus possible is sometimes a really elegant option. So if we can work with experts to come up with an elegant option that helps us frame up a mechanism that achieves the objectives that everybody favors, that's a much better approach. So, and then we don't have the same battles to try to get it supported by town meeting, right? So I think I am trying to get everybody's opinion. Everybody's opinion matters. And I do think there are possibilities here for finding paths forward that meet people's shared objectives. So that's what we're working toward. Okay, so we did put the Woodstock, we did send everybody the summary from Woodstock. And since you have all that, no need for John to necessarily speak to it unless people have questions. Does anyone have any questions for John and Jim based on the information they sent about their conversation with Woodstock?
Yeah, just one question.
Yes, Peter, hang on one second. I'm going to let Julia and then you.
Okay.
Julia.
I guess, it's good to read something, but just to get their gist of like maybe one thing that they were surprised by, or that, the most helpful thing they learned.
Well, Jim, you can chime in, but actually I think one of the things was, if you go back to, I think it was at 2018 when they first put the ordinance together, that they actually didn't have a lot of data, but they learned to collaborate with one another. And, his point to us, David Green's point to us was, guys, you have to meet in the middle. That was his term. You have to meet in the middle. And he actually, I think, used a phrase very much like the one that my friend, wise man, David Iverson used a couple of meetings ago, which was, guys, you're trying to regulate something. There is going to be pain there's going to be pain somewhere, for someone other, it's not possible to do it without that. But there was really that. And we thought that they used caps. As we talked to David, it seemed to us that even if they were in the ordinance, they did not implement anything on caps. So, Jim, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I'd like to say that the thing that surprised them is, and this won't come as any surprise to us, is that commercial STRs are moving in, by which they mean owned by corporations. He used that term specifically. He said the corporations, and this is pretty much a quote, he said, these corporations have no ties to the community and they seem to have little care about who rents the space. They are looking into how can we limit corporations. Well, we now see in Massachusetts, with the Great Barrington example, it certainly can be done. And I don't know about Vermont's laws, but I think that was a surprise that came to them. And he said, well, it probably would have happened sooner, but we had COVID, and so it didn't happen as soon. But that's what they're most concerned about right now.
Yeah, and I mean, if I can just say, because we talked about this at our last meeting, that by limiting the number of contracts, it's a very direct way to limit pure STRs, but people were not interested in that mechanism. And when we did the survey again, we saw people were not really interested in limiting the number of contracts.
And Stacey,
So yeah,
I'm sorry.
ahead,
And he said it was very hard. He gave us two messages on that. One, it's very hard to enforce that. You can't go to every house and see how many times are you renting. But there were some houses that were definitely problem houses that were renting a ton and to party goers, et cetera. One thing, they have a lever that I don't know if we would consider, I would think not, but everyone has to reapply for each March. And if they have a problem house, they simply don't up it for the next year. They simply deny their license. So that's a policy lever I hadn't really thought about. Maybe it creates too much work, but it's something that's working for them.
Yeah, Palm Springs, I think, also requires you to re-register each year. John.
No, it was my turn.
Yeah, so just one quick thing. We talked about enforcement. Oh no, can you hear me?
Yeah, I just realized I forgot Peter.
Okay,
That's right.
Peter, go first.
You're not the first one who's forgotten me. Couple things, John. Do you know what year they instituted this regulation in Woodstock?
2018.
It's interesting because I owned 10 acres in Woodstock in 2018. I never heard a thing about it. Okay, now
Well,
I wasn't a resident though.
Yeah, not to get too deep into this because it isn't so relevant, but Woodstock has the village of Woodstock, which you could, I guess, kind of loosely think about a historical district. And then they have the town of Woodstock.
I was in the town of Woodstock.
Yeah, the SDR ordinance was written for the village of
That's
Woodstock.
about 500 houses total.
No, it's more than that actually. But anyway, it was for the village.
But it now applies to the town as well.
Yeah,
It didn't back then. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Let me make a couple more questions. Everybody's so concerned about the commercial owners, and I'm not disagreeing with it. If we can do something about it, fine. 130 units on this island are owned commercially that are directly owned by companies off the island. 130 units of 2,500. In Woodstock, Vermont, it's probably 10.
Yeah, but you know what?
Let me finish,
Sorry.
John.
Right.
We're talking about minuscule numbers, but listen, I'm willing to bend a little bit here too, but I disagree 100% in what you said about meeting in the middle. You don't meet in the middle when you have 80% of the people that believe one way and 20% of the people that believe another way. You might meet at 70% of that, but you got to go with where the vote is, not by, you can't just meet in the middle. I think that's kind of a wrong attitude. I think we got to go where most of us believe we should go.
John?
Not in the middle.
Yeah, I think what David was trying to say, and what I will, when I say meet in the middle, what I mean is we need to talk to one another, because if it's just the weight of numbers, we could have probably done this in a month. So, if we can't really dialogue our way through this stuff now that, Stacey has taken us down a path that's been, long and good. We've got the levers. Let's, if we're just going to say, well, I think this, well, that's not, what's the point of that? We just need to listen to each other. And if we can't come to a consensus, if it's just going to be who's got 5 and who's got 4, that would be, for me, would be very, very sad. I want one last point on Woodstock, though, Stacey. Because we talked that David, as the fire chief, is actually responsible for enforcement. And as Jim mentioned, enforcement is an issue. But what he says is that, look, do we take people to court, for violations? No, we don't. Do I talk to them and change behavior? Yes, I do. And I think, that there's a, I thought that was an interesting point that, okay, do I have to take them to court? No. But if, there are ways to get people to change their behavior, and that he does have success with. Jim, I mean, that was my take.
That's good, John. I just want to, that's very good. I just want to go back to Peter's mention of the corporate interests, et cetera. It's true the numbers are not big now. I think that I and probably a lot of people are concerned that they might mushroom if we don't take stance now. And I just want to remind everyone, the night we met with Honolulu, Arizona, and Palm Springs, that Brent of Arizona mentioned just parenthetically that's in Sedona, Arizona, which is a high-end tourist region, 20% of the homes have recently been bought up by multinational corporations. Now, maybe 2 years ago, it hadn't happened at all. And I think that's one of the things that we can all really agree we did not want to happen here. And that's why, for me, it's a major concern.
All right, David, let's take your comment, and then I think I want to move us on.
Okay, I think that there's enforcement potential through the registration process, and I think that people need to register every year. Am I right, Mary, with that? You're on the Board of Health, so there is an opportunity there. And then I think we all can agree. I think that Jim's spot on that the numbers probably aren't big, and I personally wonder whether they'll ever get big, just because these corporations want to have a year-round draw. But I think that that we need to protect ourselves against it. I 100% agree with that, and I think that's a box that we can all check and call a victory right off the bat.
Great. All right, all. I want to make sure we get to the public. I did announce already our work group, sub-work group meeting with Judy and Town Council on Thursday. I am wondering if we might want to try to pull another subgroup together to talk about communications. Anyone who's interested, can you raise your hand if you would want to if you would want to have a work group session to talk about basically something this group could put out to the public to update on. Well, let me try a different thing. How about I try to draft an update of where we are so far that could go out to the public that I would then get your buy-in on before it went out. So it would need to be a neutral document that that is basically a summary, but instead of our meeting summaries, right, it's sort of a half pager to summarize where we are for the public, particularly in relationship to patients for in their thinking about town meeting, right? If they want to know where we are and what they can expect from this group come November, here's a sense of what we've done and where we're going.
Stacy, are you going to be able to address town meeting or not?
Someone from this group will be able to address town meeting in a consensus way from speaking for the group.
Okay.
Which we will all have to agree to. Yeah. Or at least 7 of 9 of us. Yeah.
Right. I vote for you drafting something.
You vote, sorry, what?
In favor of you drafting something for us to look at.
Okay, perfect. Anyone opposed to that? All right, so that's a to-do item for me. Let's open to the public. Thank you all for your patience. We do very much want to hear any comments you might have, and we'll take the time to hear them. So, Samanish, do they have the ability to raise their hands?
They do.
Okay, so if any of our attendees who've stuck with us for all of this have any comments you'd like to make, please raise your hands. And that goes for our alternates as well. John, if you would like, to.
I have nothing more to add.
today.
I'd rather hear the public comments.
Excellent. All right, Alvin Fargo.
Hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I am not terribly well educated in all that you've been doing in these meetings, but I'm concerned whenever I hear the word corporations. About 60 years ago, my father and mother bought their first home on Nantucket. My dad set up a subchapter S corporation. All the stock of which was him and his wife. It was their 25th wedding anniversary gift to each other. Over the years, my father and mother passed that stock on to their two daughters and to me. My dad is Alvin. My mom is Maggie. The name of this corporation is Mahal, M-A-J-A-L. It's Maggie, Alvin, Jane, my sister, A, Alvin, me, the third, and L, Lorene. And family has held this property for over 60 years. My parents are buried in Nantucket. And I'd be very concerned if the fact that it's a so-called subchapter S corporation, we would somehow be invalid or no longer legal to rent our home, and we'd never be able to keep it under those circumstances.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Alvin. And that is, you know, what if you heard at the beginning of the meeting, a lot of conversation with the data team to try to really tease out the difference between, you know, things that look like corporations but are really people, and things that are, you know, really people. So
thank you for considering that. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks. Any other public comments? Okay. Well, thank you to everyone. I think we really are making progress. It really does feel like, you know, just a chance for everybody to weigh in. It seems like we're coming closer to where are the priorities that are really held in common, where are some where we're still quite divided, and you know, where there are real opportunities to find common ground. I feel like we're getting closer to common ground. We're getting closer to greater data. So I have a lot of hope for our group, and I will see those of you who can make it on Thursday, and it will be, we will make a recording, so those who can't make it are able to tune in, and then our next meeting will be 2 weeks from now. I will be away all of next week. I will not be at my computer, so if you email me next week, you will get an out of office. So that's just a warning. You're welcome to email Semanish. I think she's in town, but I will not be here, so that's just a heads up to you all. And with that, I wish you a wonderful evening. Bye, all.